Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today, I'm going to be working on the fifth book in my epic fantasy series, Light Chaser. The book is called The Warning. If you want to learn more about the Light Chaser series or catch up, you can visit jbcantwell.com. Another reminder, every day for the first 15 minutes, I read the work that I did the day before, so you can keep up that way just in case you can't make it to the full dictation session. So I'm going to go ahead actually and read 2 days worth, as I think it's important for this particular chapter to go back a little bit and read it from the start. So I'm going to go ahead and then I will start the dictation. It was only moments until the wicks were upon me, and suddenly I was more frightened than I'd been with the hawk. Despite the light flowing through my veins, I knew whom they answered to, and I knew they were completely possessed by him. I thought about the possibility of pushing my mind into one of theirs, but I couldn't do it yet, not until one of them had me. They were flying fast, and I only had moments to take the canteen out of my bag and fill it with light from the spring. Then they were there, right on top of me. Two of them took my legs and arms and flew me away, away from that hillside, away from the fiend who was now dead. I wondered if the wicks ever got to drink the light themselves. What might it produce? I settled in, not fighting them. I had a sense that they were taking me directly to Torin, and though I didn't feel a particular battle, part of me relished the idea of finally meeting him face to face. "Bree!" I heard someone call. I turned my head and found Kenneth in the clutches of two other wicks, Brennen being flown right alongside him. "Are you okay?" I yelled, but I didn't hear his response, for the wicks had determined that we were working together. I wasn't sure if their minds still existed independently of Torin's magic, but somehow they knew not to let us speak. I looked back as they fell away, and immediately I made a decision to leave them. I thought that it would be just me against the hawk, not taking into account whoever it was controlling the hawk. Now I was in the clutches of Torin's minions, and we were flying too high above the ground for me to struggle my way out of their grip. I flipped over, looking for a spot where I might be able to escape. But then I realized my friends had had no light themselves. I was fortunate. I had magic, and I'd had a large portion of light. There was no way to survive such a fall, but I might. I lay back and tried to make a plan as they flew me somewhere much farther away than the hawk's lair had been. I'm not sure how long we were in flight, maybe even an hour, but eventually, as the sun was beginning to rise, I saw a kingdom in the distance. For a moment, my heart leapt as I thought I recognized the dark gray walls encircling the castle. It was not so unlike Eagleview, and part of me was desperate to learn that my home was our destination. But as we got closer to the ground and that kingdom, I realized it was not my own. I watched as the wicks descended, and it was only moments later that they dropped all three of us into a center square. I felt the bone in my forearm crack as I hit the ground, and I screamed out in pain. I heard similar screams from Brennan and Kenneth, but there was nothing I could do but wait for the light to mend my bones. I looked up at the sky, lying on my back, and saw the wicks as they flew away into the morning. Slowly, my bones knitted, and I was able to sit up again. I might have been terrified by what was going on in that square, but I was more focused on saving my friends than looking around. I ran to Kenneth first, as he was shouting the loudest. His words were unintelligible, and the only thing for certain was that he was in terrible pain. Now, for the first time in several months, I dug out my canteen from my bag and approached him, leaning over him, holding up the canteen. I'll get rid of that extra canteen. "You have to drink this," I screams. "It will heal you." But he seemed unable to stop, and I knew that whatever injury he had sustained was far worse than my own. For a moment, I tried to help him sit up, but it was clear he couldn't do it. So, with no other choice, I tipped the canteen and allowed several drops of light to fall upon his tongue. Stop screaming. Just drink. It only took a moment for him to settle, his eyes growing wide at the feeling I knew was pulsing through his body. There was nothing that could heal so well. I myself had healing powers that I'd long used on my old friend Oriana, but I knew they were nothing compared to this magic elixir. Soon he was sitting up and grabbed for the canteen. For a moment, I allowed him to drink deeply. Then I reached out for it. Not too much, I said. We need some for him. I nodded my head toward Brennan, and Kenneth handed the canteen back to me. This time, when I approached Brennan with the light, I realized the scene before me. I tried not to look around, tried to keep my horror to myself. It wasn't the time, and I knew I had to stay focused on Brennan. But when I got to his side, I found him with his eyes closed. For a moment, I was terrified that he'd died. But when I laid my head upon his chest, I heard the faint sound of a heartbeat. I sat up and held the canteen over his mouth, only dropping a small sip into it. Nothing happened. I was beginning to panic again, and this time I poured a large mouthful. His eyes popped open, and it was clear he was terrified. He choked on the stuff, started to try to spit it out. No, I said, you can't do that. You have to drink. He grabbed for the canteen, and I knew this meant he was feeling better. I allowed him to take it, to drink as Kenneth had. You're being a fool. They'll take it all. I didn't know what to make of this thought. Hadn't I promised myself not to allow violence in my mind again when it came to light? So, while I knew it would have been safer to take some with us, I allowed Brennan to drain what remained in the canteen. I reached out for it, and opening, seemingly disappointed that it was now empty. He passed it to me, then looked around, and so did I. This time I was forced to manage the emotions I'd had when I saw what lay upon the cobblestones in the square. Skeletons, hundreds of them. For a moment I was sure that Torin was about to appear. What had happened here? Surely it had been his work. But when I saw a lone figure appear at the top of the steps leading to the palace, I somehow knew it was not him at all. The man began to descend, and his voice was magically intensified, his words booming across the kingdom. So finally, we have you, he said, clearly excited. In that moment, I wished it had been me to take those last couple of sips of light, but it was too late now. I stood, lighting my hands and ready to fight. He kept walking, but I noticed he was not preparing a curse for me. Maybe his magic is stronger than yours, invisible. There's no time to lose. I ran in his direction, throwing curse after curse, energized by the light that still remained in my system. But as I got closer, I saw that every curse I had sent had missed. He was just as tall and terrible as he'd been before my attack. You think you can beat me? He asked, and this time his voice was quiet. We were nearly face to face now, and I knew it would only be moments before the battle would ensue. Quickly, I created a shield of protection over my body so that when he raised his wand, pointed it in my direction, his curses bounced off me, just as mine had bounced off him. But this didn't seem to bother him at all. Instead, he smiled and tweaked the aim of his wand until it was pointing at my friends. I only want you, he said. Put down your shield and send your friends away. He was only 5 feet from me now, and I dared not turn. And I wasn't about to take directions from a beast such as him. For I recognized him now. It was not Torin, but his one remaining son, Varik. I found myself suddenly unwilling to send Kennen and Brennen away. I'd made a mistake. I should have allowed them to join me, but now that they were here with me, I felt a large measure of comfort. I could protect them. I took a couple of steps until Varrik's wand was pointed at me again. His eyebrows rose. What is this? You are protecting them? Are they valuable? They're valuable to me, I said, and I let another curse fly. This time it hit his shield. He laughed. You think you can defeat me? I know you cannot. Now, lest I kill your friends, bow to me. It was me laughing now, and it actually felt genuine. The thought that I would abandon them to this level of danger was comical. You've already done it, though. But I had failed. They'd been caught by the wicks, just as I had. Where did your wicks go? I asked, smiling. I wasn't aware you had control over them until now. I suppose if I'm mistaken, you must be nearby. Tell me, why does he send you in his stead? Is he in the palace, perhaps? Varric's lips stretched into another smile. I have no information I'm permitted to share with anyone, especially you, but I can tell you that your death will be long and painful. Now come with me, all of you. I suddenly found that I was willing to do just that, mad as it was, convinced now that Torin must be waiting at the top of the staircase. I turned back and looked at Kenneth and Brennen. What would become of them? Leave my friends behind, I said with more authority in my voice than I felt. They don't deserve this. Varik laughed, then pointed his wand at the two of them and forced them upright. I don't think so, he said. These two are mine. I looked back at them desperately, wondering if I might be able to make a bargain with Varik, but I knew better than to trust a son of Torrens to hold up any type of agreement. And the truth was, I wanted them to accompany me this time. Magic or no, if I was about to die, I wanted my friends close. It was terrible, my desire to have them with me, but I knew that if I were to leave them behind, they would probably be dead by the end of the day. Yes, keeping them alongside me was the best chance they would have at life. I'd left them behind in the wildlands before, and I'd regretted it. So the three of us walked up the staircase, Varik following, not knowing what would await us at the top and hoping we would survive the coming clash. The place was strange, the hallways filled with gigantic paintings several feet taller than my head. I glanced back at Kenneth, but his eyes were on the walls too, the gilded frames catching his attention. I felt sure he was wondering how much such a thing might be worth back in Eagleview. I turned back, keeping my attention on Varik. Where are we going? I asked. You need not know, he said wickedly. You will meet the man soon enough. So this was it. In the end, it would come down to me and Torin. I wondered if he would allow his son to help, and I hoped my friends would survive the battle beside me. He led us into a gigantic room, the walls covered in gold, much more opulent than that grand hallway had been. And there, sitting atop several stairs, was a throne. Was that where he'd sat, this man Varik spoke of? For there could only be one who would sit upon such a throne. Indeed, Varik did not ascend the stairs. Instead, he held out his arm, indicating that I should take a seat. Despite his insistence, I found I actually wanted to sit up high. It would allow me a better position if Torin were to enter, and I could keep an eye on Varik more easily. Without dissent, I walked up the stairs and climbed into the throne. It was huge, and I wondered if it had once belonged to the man in the paintings we'd seen in the hallway. It was bigger than any throne or chair that I've ever seen, more suited to a giant like Duna than to me. Now what? I asked. Where is he? But Varrik's attention had shifted, and I found him staring at Brennan and Kenneth instead of me. The two of you can sit here, he said, pulling out a chair at a grand dining table. 10 skeletons sat in the chairs, and Varik was quick to push them onto the floor. Sit, he demanded. He lifted his wand and forced a struggling Kenneth to walk over to the table. Brennan right behind him. Kenneth tried to turn his head, tried to speak to Brennan, but whatever the curse was Varik was using on him, he could only walk forward, and it appeared his voice was too weak to talk. I tried to lift my hands as I watched my friends sit down at that terrible table, but immediately I found I was stuck as they were. The only things I was able to move were my eyes and my mouth. Because of this, I could see every movement Varik made, and I began plotting how to take him out of this world. Finally, as the two were seated, Varik walked up to Wens. the one in the seat beside Brennan. "This fellow here is Jack," he said, picking up the skeleton's hand and shaking it as if it were alive and well. "Here, don't be rude. Take his hand and shake it. It's tradition to greet a possible adversary in such a way." Brennan looked nervously up at me, but I had no power to help him, and a moment later, Varik grabbed onto his hand and forced him to shake. Silent tears ran down Brennan's face, and I was forcefully reminded that he was still a child, no matter how brave he appeared to be. "You're still a child, too. We all are." What had I been thinking? Why had I allowed these people to follow me into danger? Varik was clearly mad, speaking to the skeletons as if they were at a grand party, as if there were a grand party happening. In fact, he picked one up from a chair, a female. He put one hand on her waist and the other in his hand, and her other hand in his, and began to dance around the room with her. He hummed a tune I didn't know, and I wondered how long he'd been in this kingdom waiting. "You should let me go," I said, glancing at the others. "Your father will want to fight. Am I right? I don't think he'll take kindly to having his prey delivered to him so easily." Immediately, Varik dropped the skeleton to the floor, and a couple of the bones broke easily, just as my arm had. I wondered how long they'd been in this place, but it was too late for them. We still had a chance. "You are about to have the audience of your life," he said. "As you say, I'm not to harm you, but I suspect my father would not realize it if I did." "Oh, he will," I said with false certainty. For whatever reason, Torin was obsessed with killing me himself. I knew this fact, had learned it from Bevan, Torin's third son. And on top of that, I knew that every other name in the book had been killed with Torin's own hand. Stay focused. You'll find out the reasons soon enough. I'd come across the book when I'd met Bevan. He'd stolen it from his father years before. Now, though, Torin was after me. I wondered what else he had in his plans and what threat I represented. "That'll be just fine," Varik said. He turned to face the others again, raising his wand. A moment later, he let a curse fly, and it hit Kenneth directly in the chest. With one lone cry, he slumped out of his chair, hitting the ground as the skeleton had. But I knew something Varik didn't. All of us had light, and he would be healed soon enough. "And what about you, little one?" he said, approaching Brennan. "I see you and Jack here are becoming friends. I would hate to break up the party. Alas, I have little choice." At this, I realized none of us would be able to defend ourselves against him. I was stuck to the chair like an insect trapped in sap from a tree, unable to use any of my tricks against him. But then I realized I hadn't used my greatest trick of all. So I closed my eyes and reached out to Varik with my mind. It wasn't difficult for me to find him, but it was clear that I'd surprised him. Looking inside, I saw that he was not only possessed by his father, instead, that he was not possessed by his father. Instead, he was acting on his own. "It would be wise of you to stop," I said in my mind. "You know he won't be happy about it." Varik, looking back at me, uncertainty on his face. I had hit home. "Torin likes to play with his own prisoners. He might have taught you well, but I can all but guarantee he will kill you if you hurt them any more. And if not him, I will myself." Suddenly, he seemed to realize that there was truth in my words. He turned and strode toward me, wand outstretched. "Oh, no, no, no," I said. "That would be the most foolish thing of all, and you know it." But this didn't stop his approach. A moment later, he flew up the stairs, putting each hand on the armrests of the throne and looking me in the eye. "You are mistaken," he said. "I have been promised this for months, but now I've succeeded where Phelan failed." I laughed. "You know I killed him too. What's to stop me from eliminating his big brother?" His eyebrows raised, and he was obviously surprised by this new information. His father must have kept this to himself. How is it possible? He asked. That's not what I was told. And why would he have told you the truth? I asked. You're just a minion, just like one of the Wicks. You're expendable, but I think you already know that. Come on, do it now before he arrives. Take his treasure and be on your way. You're mad. It was true. I was taking terrible risks, but I was doing it for my friends. I didn't dare take my eyes off Varik, though. The last thing I wanted was to remind him how important they were to me. Maybe you can come to my side, I said, reaching. You and I can kill him together. Then you can take this kingdom as your own. His face relaxed, and he chuckled. This kingdom already belongs to me. Have you not noticed no others live here? And what's the point of being a king if you have no one to rule over? He seemed not to expect this question, but he had an answer immediately. They will come when all is said and done, possibly from your own eagle view. Those who are worthy will make the journey here, and they will be mine, just as you are now. You're wrong, I said in my mind. You know it's not true. He's lying, and soon enough you'll be dead too. Varik bashed his palm into his forehead and took a step back. Get out of my head, he demanded. Speak in words, not thoughts, or I will turn my attention back to your friends. I risked a glance in their direction, but Kenneth was still on the floor, unable to move, and it appeared that the skeleton's hand was still shaking that of Brennen. He looked terrified, and it brought new resolve to me. I had to distract Varik to keep him away from them. You wouldn't dare take a life without your father here, I tried. You know he will beat you as he did your brother before you. Something in his face shifted, a memory, perhaps. Yes, I know about Bevan, I said. I know about his years of torture, and I know that Phelan killed him without permission. Why do you think it was so easy for me to kill Phelan? It was because your father didn't care anymore. He was getting angry now, something that brought me a measure of relief. He strode up to the throne again, raised his arm, and hit me in the stomach with a curse. I might have bent over in pain had I not been frozen on the spot. Instead, the only thing I could do was yell. He laughed, clearly satisfied at the pain he had caused. He turned again, walking away toward the table. Now, I think it's there. He will kill you for this, and you know it. He turned his head, laughing loudly at me, but the uncertainty was still there. You think you know this, and yet you've never met the man yourself. Trust me, he will be pleased with my work here. It was then, as he turned away again, that I realized the risk I needed to take. I allowed him to approach Brennen, to point his wand at him and shoot a curse at his chest. Brennen screamed out in pain, falling to the floor next to Kenneth. He was sobbing now, breathing heavily. He had no defenses. The fact that he could do little else other than collect food for us on our journey became plain. Still, I allowed him to cry and shout. I needed Varik distracted. Next, he approached Kenneth, sending a curse that hit him in the back of the head. I gasped, unable to control myself. It was then, as Varik turned to me, that I realized my trick had worked. But Kenneth, I prayed to the heavens that the light would result in his survival, and in that moment, with Varik distracted by his own glee, I was able to break the curse that was holding me down. In an instant, I conjured an orb of fire and threw it at Varik's head. I missed, and yet he seemed not to understand that I was free now, perhaps not noticing it since he was under attack. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Kenneth and Brennen standing up, Kenneth slowly walking behind Varik. I made sure to keep Varik busy, terrified by what I knew Kenneth was about to do. Just because you can duck out of the way doesn't mean you will win this fight, I said. And you threatened me? The fact that you dare do such a thing will interest my father. I stayed sitting in the chair, not moving, not wanting him to realize I'd been completely freed, not wanting him to realize what was about to happen. But I couldn't control everything, and a moment later he turned his head back toward the table. There was only a moment of confusion clear on his face before Kenneth swung his club, hitting Varik on the side of the face. "You think you can dodge that?" Kenneth asked. But before he had a chance to say another word, Varik had him on the ground. He wrapped his hands around Kenneth's neck, reminding me forcefully that I had done such a thing only weeks before. But what I knew was how distracted such an event could make a sorcerer. Indeed, if someone had come up behind me that afternoon with calm, I would have been easy to curse, easy even to kill in such barbaric fashion. Barbaric fashion, because that's what it was. I got his attention again, shouting out, "You can't win here," I said. "You can barely hold your own wand against a regular man. What makes you think you'll be able to do away with me?" Slowly, he pushed himself up from the ground, putting his hands on the back of his head where he'd been hit. A moment later, he crossed the floor, this time aiming his wand at me. Well, this is one right here. He had his hands around her neck like 5 paragraphs ago, so we'll have to fix that. I had been counting on this as I'd seen Brennen crawling toward Kenneth behind Varik's back. As Varik tried to curse me, Brennen picked up the club Kenneth had lost control of. I sent a curse in Varik's direction, finally letting it be known that I was completely freed of his power. I stood up, running down the stairs toward him, hitting him again and again with everything I had. It worked. He was as distressed as I'd intended. And in the last moments before he struck me again, Brennen gritted his teeth, walked up behind him, and hit him in the back of the head with the club with even greater force than Kenneth had done. He dropped the club to the ground, then kicked Varik's body repeatedly. I didn't know if he was still alive, and I warned Brennen to stand aside. I walked up to Varik, looking down at him, and sent 2 bolts of lightning into his chest. This time, when I hit him, he had no shield, no chance. I leaned over him, crawling to him on all fours. "Look at you," I said softly. "I suspect your father will be as easy for me to take out of this world." His eyes grew wide as he faced death, and with that, he let go of his last breath, no longer part of this world. I couldn't wait to meet his father. All right. Let's see here. Get to the right document, and there we are. Immediately, I rushed to Brennan's side, period. He was still down on the floor, perhaps over by what he'd just done, period. A moment later, Kenneth joined me, period, new line, open quote. "Are you okay? Question mark, close quote," Kenneth asked, period. New line, open quote. Brennen shook his head, more tears falling from his eyes, period. Open quote. New line. Open quote. "Does it hurt? Question mark, close quote," I asked, period. I walked over to him, placing both my hands upon his chest, period. New line, open quote. "Everywhere, close quote, he choked out, period. New line, open quote. I recognized this, the feeling of pain reaching out into every part of my body, period. I gripped onto him hard, closed my eyes, and imagined my healing energy entering his system, period. I could feel it as it left my hands, comma, but part of me worried that I would be undo. But part of me worried that my magic would be as useless with him as it had been with Oriana, period. She hadn't she? Question mark. It hadn't mattered how much power I'd had, period. New line. Not in the end, period. New line. Still, comma, I had to try, period. New line. It didn't take long for Brennan to sit up, comma, wiping away his tears of his sleeve, period. Open quote. I feel better, comma, close quote, he said tentatively, period. But when he looked across the room and saw the club sitting on the floor, comma, his eyes grew wide, period. Open quote. What have I done? Question mark, close quote, he asked. Period. New line. I glanced over at the club, period. Open quote. You've just saved all our lives, comma, close quote, I said, period. New line, open quote. But what about him? Question mark, close quote. He pointed at Kenneth, period. Open quote. I didn't do it on my own, period. Close quote. New line. Kenneth stood up and strode us, period. Open quote. None of us did, comma, close quote, he said, period. He turned to me, period. Open quote. You were helpful, comma, too, period. We all just did what we needed to do, period. Comma. Nothing more, period. Close quote. He reached out his hands and pulled Brennan to period. Open quote. You have no reason to regret what you've done, period. Close quote. New line. Kenneth. Undo. Brennan didn't speak again, period. Instead, he stayed by Kenneth's side, comma, hanging on to his undo, gripping onto his arm, comma, unwilling to be standing there alone, period. I walked across undo. I got up, comma, myself, comma, and went to meet them, period. New line, open quote. But when I got to their side, comma, I wasn't sure what to do, period. I was so grateful for their actions, comma, but I wasn't used to giving affection for such things, comma, for any things, period. Still, comma, I opened and enveloped them both in a hug, period. New line, open quote. I'm so sorry I left you, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. I thought I could handle it on my own, period. Close quote. I wondered if things might have been different without them here, period. Bear with me, period. Would it have been easier? Question mark. New line. No, period. After all, comma, they'd used the club to kill him in the end, period. The only thing I had been good for was distracting him, period. New line. I looked around the room at all of the hanging canvases framed by gold, period. Line. Open quote. What is this place? Question mark. Close quote. I asked, period. Open quote. Do you know what kingdom we're in? Question mark. Close quote. We are in. New line. Kenneth shrugged, period. Open quote. We were in the for a long time, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. We could be anywhere, period. But let's get out of here now, semicolon. We can look at your map once we're safe, period. Close quote, new line. He was right, comma. And for a moment, I struggled to think of where we might hide, period. Torrens cap wicks were still out there somewhere, comma, semicolon. Were they searching for us right then, question mark. Did they know that we had survived, question mark. New line. Hopefully, comma, Torren isn't with them, period. New line. I had never met Torren, comma, and I had long wondered what it would be like to face off against him, period. What had made him so evil, question mark. To my knowledge, babies weren't born that way, period. Villains were made to be villains, comma, not born to be villains, period. New line. What had happened to him, question mark. New line. Thinking of Bevan, comma, I tried to imagine what life might have been like in the Cap Opal Cap Kingdom, period. Yes, comma, it was true that I knew where to find Torren, comma, or at least where to find his, period. Was he a king, question mark. New line. Maybe he called himself that, semicolon. He was so much older than I was, comma, 1,000 years, comma. And I felt certain that he did, period. It was then, undo. Suddenly, comma, I heard a screeching sound from outside the throne room, period. New line, open quote. Quick, exclamation point. Get down, exclamation point, close quote. I ordered, period. New line. All of us dropped to our hands and knees, and I made for the banquet table, period. It had been covered in a cloth more years ago, undo, many years ago, comma, and it was essentially shredded, period. Still, comma, it was better than nothing, comma, and I did not yet know how to make myself invisible, period. New line. A moment later, comma, all three of us were hiding under the table, comma, but then the sound stopped, period, where the screams had echoed through the corridors, comma. Now there was simply silence, period. New line, open quote. We need to get out of here, comma, close quote, I said, quietly, period. Open quote. Where should we hide? Question mark. We need to wait for them to fly away and be certain they're not coming back before we show ourselves again, period. Close quote, new line. Open quote. I know just the place, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period. Open quote. Follow me, period, close quote, new line. He climbed to his feet and made a beeline for the door, period. He opened it a crack as Brennan and I approached, period. New line, open quote. Open quote. Open quote. There's nothing out there, comma. Period. I think we can make a run for it, period. Close quote. New line, open quote. Where are we going? Question mark. Close quote, I asked, period. The wicks had only been gone for a few minutes, comma, and I worried they were still lurking in the castle, period. New line. Kenneth finger to his lips, comma, shushing me, period. He stepped out into the hall, comma, beckoning for us to follow, period. We didn't dare run, comma, as our silence was of the highest importance, period. So, comma, we tiptoed through the hall until we were close to the outer staircase of the castle, period. New line, open quote. This is where it will get dicey, comma, close quote, he whispered, period. Open quote. Let me go first, period, close quote, new line. Inside, comma, I objected to this, comma, but the guilt I felt for having left my friends behind was strong, period. I knew that if I didn't let him go first, comma, I wouldn't live it down, period. What was worse was that it could result in him losing the confidence he'd accumulated in the months since I'd last seen him, period. So, comma, when he turned to look at me again, comma, I nodded my head, period. Open quote. I'll have your back, comma, close quote, I said, comma. A fiery orb in my hands, period. New line. He turned and ran away. Undo. He looked out at the square, comma, and we all saw the cap wicks hovering above it, period. It was about to be undo. This plan was crazy, and I wasn't even sure where he was taking us, period. But then, comma, as he took off, comma, his intention became known, period. New line. He was headed to the staircase, comma. Spiral. And I suddenly understood that he was taking us down into the dungeons, period. New line. A moment later, comma. He reached the other side of the staircase without anyone being the wiser, period. He turned and beckoned for us to join him, period. New line. Open quote. You go first, comma, close quote, I said to Brennen, period. Open quote. I'll watch from behind, period. Be fast, period, close quote, new line. Brennan looked up at me, comma, doubt all over his face, period. Open quote. Are you sure? Question mark, close quote. He asked quietly, period. New line. Open quote. Nope, comma, close quote, I said honestly, period. Open quote. But I think Kenneth is right to be taking us out of the castle. Period. Now go, period, close quote. New line. He gritted his teeth, comma, turned, comma, and ran, period. New line. I kept my eyes on the sky, comma, but the wicks hovered there innocently, period. I wondered if, comma, now that Varik was dead, comma, Torin's possession of them was less powerful than it had been minutes before, period. In any case, comma, I crossed, undo. I created another shield and ran across the stairway, comma, finally making it to the spiral staircase where my friends awaited me, period. New line. Without a backward glance, comma, Kenneth turned and began running down the stairs, period. Brennan and I both followed without question, period. It was difficult for me to allow somebody else to make the decisions, comma, as the months had dragged on. Past. comma, I'd gradually learned to allow myself to be helped by others, period. It was difficult to do so, comma, as I was usually the only one with magic, period. Frequently, but both Kennen undo, but both Brennen and Kenneth had shown their strength, period, comma, and I had no reason to argue, period. New line. After a few moments of flying down the staircase, comma, we reached the bottom, period. What awaited us in the hall between the staircase and the dungeons was enough to turn my stomach, period. It had been bad enough a square, comma, but for some reason down here it looked even worse, period. New line. Hundreds of bodies littered the floor. Skeletons, comma, long since their bodies long since rotted away, period. I remembered the cracking sound that had come when Varik had released his dance partner in the throne room, period. Check, period. Her bones had cracked like pottery, comma, quickly turning to dust at his touch, period. New line. It must have been many, comma, many years before that the violence had occurred, period. For now, comma, we faced a sea of people. Of people, comma, all of them reaching for the staircase, comma, none of them reaching it, undo. None of them gaining access to it, period. They'd been trapped down here, period. New line. Open quote. I think we should continue, close quote, Kenneth said, comma. And I was aware that his eyes were, undo, that he kept his gaze up, comma, perhaps not willing to take in the massacre at our feet, period. Open quote, follow me, period, close quote, new line. I didn't argue, comma, and I didn't want to, comma, anyway, period. As far as I could tell, comma, his plan was as good as any, period. Frightening, comma, yes, comma, but a good plan nonetheless, period. New line. At the end of the hall, we turned and found the opening to the dungeons, period. Walking inside, comma, I couldn't help undo. My jaw fell open, comma, and I was unable to help get it closed again, period. The place was gigantic, comma, and when I tried to counting the cells, comma, I quickly lost my place, period. Within each were no fewer than 10 people, comma, only 2 of the cells left vacant, period. A handful. Somehow, comma, some of the people had escaped, comma, only to meet their end back in the hallway, period. New line, open quote. What are we going to do down here? Close quote, I said, period. I tried to imagine what it was going to feel like sleeping next to this undo the many bodies lying on the floor, period. New line. Question mark. Open quote. Not exactly welcoming, comma, close quote, Brennan said, gripping my hand tightly in his fist, period. New line. At this, comma, Kenneth smiled, period, open quote. Here's hoping those flyers don't find us down here, period. Have you ever dealt with them before? Question mark, close quote. He asked me, period. New line. Open quote. Sure, comma, close quote, I said, period. I've never undo. Open quote. I've never seen so many at once, comma, though, period. There were at least 50 of them, period. I can't say how long they'll remain here searching for us, period, close quote, new line. Open quote. We will just need to hide longer, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. We can wait them out, period. Open quote. He walked down the hall, comma, and when he made it to the end, comma, he found a small room with a bed and a basin, period. Close quote. Open quote. Maybe in here, period, close quote, new line. I peeked my head around the corner, comma, looking for signs of life, period. But it appeared we'd found the quarters of the guards, period. There were no skeletons here, comma, just a hard floor and a few blankets, period. New line. It is 10 o'clock. So I didn't get super far today, 1,691 words, but that's because that chapter was pretty long that I read earlier. So, anyways, I'm done for today. Um, two things. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jen@thehumanauthor.com. And a little mini announcement again that sometime in the next 6 weeks or so, there will be audio coming out, just my reading of Wildlands, which is the first book in this series. So we'll be sending out that information and putting it up online so that you can take a look at that and grab on to those audio files and listen to them and get caught up with this because we're at book 5. Anyways, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. Have a